I was bartending at a pub in Dublin when an American couple finished their meal and left a €50 note on the table. Their bill was €42. I brought back their change. The man looked confused and pushed the money toward me. I explained that was their change. He said, "No, that was my tip." I told him we don't really do tips here, and certainly not 20%. He insisted. I explained Irish servers get paid actual wages. He said, "But how will you survive?" I showed him my paycheck stub. He studied it like it was written in ancient Greek. Then he said, "This can't be legal. In America, restaurants would go bankrupt paying servers this much." I told him American restaurants should probably reconsider their business model then. That's the kind of everyday anthropology I cover. Here, not tourist gossip, but economic psychology in real life. If you like stories that reveal how systems shape behavior, this channel's where they live weekly. He asked if I was secretly wealthy or had a second job. I was just a regular bartender making a regular wage. He left the tip anyway and told me to treat myself because I deserved better than socialism. So, the tip was nice, but I was already getting paid fairly. Last month, a woman in Barcelona tried to tip her taxi driver by leaving cash on the seat and running out before he could return it. He chased her down the street waving the money. She thought she was being robbed. In Stockholm, an American asked me where to find the tip jar at a coffee shop. There wasn't one. He asked where he should leave money for good service. I said the price includes service. He placed coins on the counter anyway and winked. I donated it to charity. And that was just Tuesday. I work front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam. An American businessman checked out and handed me €20. I thanked him, but explained we don't expect tips. He looked offended. He said, "In America, we tip because we appreciate good service." I told him I appreciated being paid a living wage by my employer. He said that's not how the service industry works. I reminded him he was in the Netherlands, not Nevada. He insisted that tipping is universal because it's basic human decency. I explained that paying workers properly is actually the decent thing. He said, "So you're telling me you'd rather have socialism than extra cash?" I told him I'd rather have a system where my rent doesn't depend on customer mood. He said I was missing out on the American dream. I said I was living the Dutch reality. He left the €20 on the counter and walked away. I used it to buy the team coffee. We all appreciated the American dream that morning. I was serving tables at a restaurant in Rome when an American family finished dinner. The father asked for the check, saw the total, and asked where the service charge was. I told him it's included in the price. He said, "No, I mean the mandatory gratuity." I explained Italy doesn't do that. He pulled out his phone and started Googling. He showed me an article about American restaurants and said, "See, 18% for parties over 6. I counted his family. 4 people. He said, "Well, we're planning to have more kids, so technically we should tip now." His wife looked embarrassed. I told him the meal costs what it costs, and that's it. He said, "But how do I show appreciation?" I suggested saying, "Thank you." He looked genuinely confused. He asked if Italian servers get offended by tips. I said no, but we don't expect them. He left €5 anyway and apologized that it wasn't more. He'd already paid €40 for 4 pasta dishes. The pasta came with the service built in. I drive for a taxi company in Oslo. I picked up an American woman from the airport. The meter read 340 kroner. She handed me 400 and told me to keep the change. I gave her back the 60 kroner. She refused it. I explained Norwegian taxi drivers earn good salaries. She said, "But you drove me safely." I said that's literally my job. She said, In America, we reward good service. I told her I get rewarded every month with my paycheck. She said she felt uncomfortable not tipping. I told her to feel comfortable because this is Norway. Most people watch travel vlogs for destinations. This channel's about the invisible rules that run them. If decoding culture like this clicks with you, subscribing isn't support, it's access. She asked if I was struggling financially. I showed her my phone with my banking app. She saw my salary. She asked how that was possible. I explained labor laws. She said, "But don't you want extra money?" I told her I wanted fair compensation, which I already had. She insisted I take 20 kroner for gas. The taxi was electric. She left the money on the seat anyway. I donated it to a children's charity. She texted me later, asking if I was okay. I manage a cafe in Copenhagen. An American tourist ordered a coffee and a pastry. The total was 60 kroner. He gave me a 100 kroner note. I gave him 40 back. He said, "That's for you." I said, "That's his change." He said, "I know, I'm tipping you." I explained Danish workers don't rely on tips. He said, "Everyone relies on tips. That's economics." I told him Danish economics work differently. He said he took Econ 101 and knows about supply and demand. I asked what that had to do with tipping. He said tipping increases supply of good service. I told him good service is mandatory here, not optional. He said, "So you're saying you give good service even without tips?" I said, "Yes, that's the expectation." He looked amazed. He asked if Denmark was a utopia. I said it was just Denmark. He took a photo of his receipt and said he was posting it to show Americans what's possible. The receipt was for 60 kroner, total, with no tip line. I work at a hostel in Prague. An American backpacker asked how much to tip housekeeping. I said tipping isn't expected. He said, "But they clean my room." I said yes, that's their job, and they're paid for it. He said, "In America, housekeeping depends on tips to survive." I told him Czech housekeepers depend on their salaries. He asked what salary. I told him they earn about 25,000 crowns monthly. He did the math on his phone. He said, "That's only $2,100. How do they live?" I explained cost of living is different. Rent here is 8,000 crowns. Food is cheap. Healthcare is covered. He said, "But what about emergencies?" I said, "That's what savings and social systems are for." He said he needed to tip them anyway because he couldn't live with himself. I told him to live with himself just fine because they're not struggling. He left 200 crowns in his room with a note. The housekeeper brought it to me confused. She thought he forgot his money. I explained American guilt. She kept it, but seemed more concerned than grateful. I was working security at a museum in Berlin. An American couple tried to tip me after I gave them directions. I politely declined. The man said, "Is it offensive here?" I said no, just unnecessary. He said, "But you helped us." I said, "That's what I'm paid to do." He asked how much I make. I told him about 3,200 euros monthly. He said, "For a security guard?" I said yes, with benefits and 5 weeks vacation. His wife looked shocked. She said, "In America, security guards need 2 jobs." I told her that sounds exhausting. The man said, "But don't you want to move up?" I said, "I like my job." He said, "You're happy being a security guard?" I said, "I'm happy being employed with dignity." He tried to give me 10 euros anyway. I told him to donate it inside. There was a donation box for exhibit restorations. He looked at it and said, "But that goes to the museum." I said, "Exactly." He said, "But you earned it." I said, "I already earned my salary." He walked away, shaking his head. His wife whispered something about European work ethics. I work at a train station information desk in Zurich. An American asked for help finding his platform. I showed him. He pulled out his wallet. I told him I don't accept tips. He said, "It's just 2 francs. I said I can't take it. He said, "Why not? I'm grateful." I explained Swiss Federal Railway employees are government workers. We can't accept money. He said, "What if I insist?" I said, "I'd have to report it." He looked stunned. He said, "You'd report someone for being nice?" I explained it's considered bribery. He said, "A 2-franc bribe?" I said, "The amount doesn't matter." He asked what happens in Switzerland when someone wants to show appreciation. I told him to say thank you or write a compliment card. He said, "That's it?" I said, "That's it." He asked if Swiss people ever show gratitude. I said yes, through words and respect. He said, "In America, cash talks." I said in Switzerland, rules talk louder. He put his wallet away and thanked me. Then he asked if thanking me was enough. I said yes. He seemed disappointed. He took his train on time, which was the actual service I provided. I bartended at a pub in Edinburgh. An American ordered a pint. It cost £4.50. He gave me £10. I gave him $5.50 back. He pushed the coins toward me. I pushed them back. He pushed them forward again. This went on 3 times. Finally, he said, "Keep it." I said, "I don't need it." He said, "It's a tip." I said, "Scottish bartenders get paid hourly." He said, "Everyone gets paid hourly, but tips help." I told him my hourly rate is £11, and that's plenty. He said, "What if you give exceptional service?" I said that's expected, not exceptional. He asked what happens if service is bad. I said I get fired, not untipped. He said, "So there's no incentive?" I said keeping my job is incentive. He looked at his coins like they were useless. He asked what he should do with them. I said buy another half pint or save them. He left them on the bar anyway and said, "For the next person." The next person was Scottish. She handed me the coins and asked if someone forgot their change. I put it in the register. I work at a pharmacy in Helsinki. An American came in to pick up a prescription. The cost was €12. He paid with a €20 note. I gave him €8 back. He handed me €2 and said, "For your help." I explained Finnish pharmacists don't accept tips. He said, "Why not?" I told him we're healthcare professionals. He said, "So are American pharmacists, and they appreciate tips." I said American pharmacists accept tips? He paused. He said, "Well, maybe not pharmacists, but the pharmacy techs do." I told him I'm the pharmacist, and this isn't America. He said, "But you answered my questions about medication." I said that's literally my job description. He said, "In America, we tip for good customer service." I explained healthcare isn't customer service here. It's a right. He asked, "What's the difference?" I told him customer service implies the customer is always right. In healthcare, the pharmacist is always right about medication. He laughed nervously. Then he asked if I was offended by the tip offer. I said no, just confused by the logic. He said, "The logic is simple. You helped me, so I pay you extra." I said, "Your taxes already paid me through the healthcare system." He looked at his €2 like they'd betrayed him. He asked if there was anything in Finland he could tip for. I said maybe restaurants if the service was extraordinary, but even then, it's optional. He said, "So basically never?" I said basically yes. He put his €2 away and thanked me. Then he asked if thanking me was enough. I said it was perfect. He left looking relieved, but also slightly lost. Like he'd just learned money couldn't solve everything. The thing about tipping culture is it makes perfect sense when you're inside it. If you grow up thinking servers survive on tips, then not tipping feels cruel. But once you're outside that system, you realize paying workers properly isn't radical. It's just math. When Americans visit Europe, they're not being difficult. They're genuinely trying to be kind. The confusion isn't malicious. It's cultural whiplash. They've been taught that tipping equals respect, and suddenly that equation doesn't work anymore. If you made it here, you're already the kind of person who sees culture as code, not chaos. I unpack stories like this every week, not for tourists, but for thinkers. Subscribing just keeps you in the loop. And somewhere right now, another American is leaving money on a counter in Vienna, while a very confused Austrian tries to give it back. Both of them thinking they're doing the right thing, neither understanding why the other won't cooperate.